General Hospital spoilers reveal that Nina is spiraling into a full-blown crisis, one where not only her reputation, relationships, and social standing are eroding by the day, but even her self-esteem and sanity are unraveling under the heat of exposed secrets. When her affair with Drew, her ex-lover and also her biological daughter Willow's boyfriend, comes to light, Nina is not just hated. She becomes a symbol of brazen and shameless betrayal. What once seemed like distant gossip has now become open conversation on every street corner of Port Charles. The scornful glances, the relentless rumors, and the reproaches from those she once trusted are closing in on her, leaving her with no way out. Every passing day feels like she's being roasted alive in the rising flames of public opinion, and the most terrifying part is that she can no longer control the narrative in which she is the central character. Every effort to hide the truth, every denial, every carefully crafted lie to protect her image and influence has now become a crushing burden on Nina's shoulders, making it impossible for her to distinguish what's real and what's fake. She once believed she could manipulate everything, believed that with enough intelligence and finesse, she could extinguish any fire before it consumed her. But she was wrong. Those adjustments she once executed so confidently were nothing more than a string of delusional moves leading to an inevitable downfall. When Willow learns the full truth, that Nina is not only the mother she cannot forgive, but also the woman who slept with her boyfriend while pretending to be trustworthy, whatever fragile bond remained between mother and daughter crumbles instantly. Willow not only cuts off contact, but also reduces Nina to a complete stranger, someone utterly undeserving of any path to redemption. Meanwhile, Michael, the former power broker and the only one who could have legally shielded Nina in her recent disputes, also turns his back. He doesn't have to speak out, criticize, or oppose her outright. His silence alone is enough to render Nina invisible to Port Charles's influential forces. Everything Nina once built, her authority at Crimson Magazine, her image as a repentant mother, a woman capable of love and change, has now collapsed into nothingness. Amid the chaos, Nina desperately searches for an anchor, a person who might still see her as a human being, not a social disgrace. And bitterly, the only one left is Drew, the man who dragged her down with him. Nina knows returning to Drew is a contradictory, even insane decision. She once despised him, was disgusted by how he manipulated Willow's emotions, and raged when she discovered that Drew saw her merely as a convenient replacement during his moments of weakness. But now, with everything in ruins and everyone she tried to hold on to having turned away, Drew, who is just as vilified as she is, becomes her last remaining ally. Not out of love, or the passion they once had in her office, but because they have no one else. Both were cast out by the same person, Willow. Both know they are the epicenter of a social storm, and only they can truly understand what it feels like to be isolated, judged, and turned into a joke in a town that once applauded them. And so, amidst the wreckage, as Nina sits alone in despair, Drew's name rises like a reflex, not as an ex-lover, but as a partner in crime, the only one who understands there is no going back. If Nina ever had a chance to make things right, to find herself again, that door has now slammed shut. Her final adjustment, her last act of defiance, is accepting the truth. She has fallen too far. And the only way to survive now is to cling to the very man who helped create this tragedy. Going back to Drew, in a way, is the final turn on a path that has no crossroads left. And the most painful part is that Nina knows, this relationship will not save her, will not bring her forgiveness, will not return things to how they once were. But at least, among the ashes, she still has someone just as burnt, someone who knows they have nothing left to lose. And that's what makes it all so terrifying, because when people have no other choice, they're willing to do anything, even the very things they once swore never to repeat. Nina and Drew, in their utter despair and isolation, have lost all remaining boundaries between morality and instinct. After all the hurt, betrayal, and rejection from the Port Charles community, these two, once hailed as power players and influential figures, have now fallen into a night of lust, loneliness, and self-destruction. in a seemingly harmless moment of weakness. They throw themselves into each other like two desperate souls clinging to a fleeting sense of existence. But what they didn't anticipate, what they never imagined in their dark impulsiveness, was that they were being watched by a pair of innocent eyes, Wiley, the child they once vowed to protect. Wiley, the pure-hearted boy in a chaotic world, stood at the doorway, wide-eyed and stunned, as he witnessed Nina, the woman he had learned to call Grandma, and Drew, the man who once held him like a father, commit an act that even a child's intuition knew was wrong. He didn't need to understand adult emotions, morality, or love. He simply felt, and that tender heart understood one thing clearly. He had been betrayed. The shock Wiley experienced is beyond words. He didn't cry, didn't scream, he simply turned and walked away. But that silence was the true storm. Poised to obliterate every fragile defense Nina and Drew were trying to rebuild around themselves. Wiley carries within him a nameless hurt, and instinctively he turns to Donna, his best friend who's always been there. Donna is not only the daughter of Carly and Sonny, two people who have never tolerated betrayal, but a sharp, justice-minded girl. When Wiley tells her what he saw, Donna doesn't just listen, she understands. And from there, a wave of childlike justice is awakened. Wiley and Donna, though just children, become the key players in a new showdown between truth and the tired lies of Port Charles. Their innocence becomes the clearest mirror reflecting the moral decay of adults. And once the story is told by these children, every glance, every gesture, every whisper in the dark, the entire community begins to tremble. What Nina and Drew once hid and justified with reasons like, "We were lonely," or "We just wanted empathy," now holds no weight. Because when a child rises to accuse the betrayal they witnessed, forgiveness becomes a luxury. Port Charles has never been forgiving when it comes to hurting children, even unintentionally. Carly, upon learning that her daughter Donna and her grandson Wiley witnessed such a horrifying scene, will not stay silent. She will erupt like a storm, demanding justice not only for the kids but for everything Nina and Drew have trampled. Sonny, who once tried to keep his distance, will not stand idle when his daughter's peace is threatened. Willow, already struggling to heal, will collapse beyond recovery upon discovering her own son had to witness the downfall of his biological grandmother and her ex-boyfriend. And Michael, who once observed in silence, can no longer stay quiet now that his son has been dragged into the nightmare he fought so hard to protect him from. Nina and Drew, once at the heart of sophisticated power plays and strategic mind games, are now reduced to the lowest position, threats to children. They're no longer figures of pity or tragic outcasts, they are seen as dangers that must be removed. No more room for justification. No more defenders. And the most terrifying part? They know it. They know that when the story is told through the mouth of a child, even without photos, even without an adult witness, it's enough to shatter every wall of defense. Because in Port Charles, a child's word can carry 100 times more weight than the excuses of a failed adult. Nina and Drew will be cast out. They will lose any chance to rebuild. They will be crushed by lawyers, family courts, and the media, not merely for betraying morals, but for betraying the sacred trust a child places in the adults meant to protect them. This is no longer just an affair. It is now the center of a battle to reclaim the emotional safety of children. And in that battle, no one in Port Charles will stand with them. Nina and Drew didn't just make a mistake. They opened the door to a nightmare that can only be closed by removing them from the lives of the innocent. And this time, the punishment won't come from a courtroom, but from the disappointed eyes of the children who once called them family. Donna and Wiley, two children once shielded by the love and expectations of the adults around them, have ultimately become the ones to bring the truth into the light, a bitter, filthy, and deeply betraying truth that should never have reached the innocent eyes of their young hearts. The scene between Nina and Drew, secretive, weak, and primal, left an unhealable crack in Wiley's soul. While in Donna, it ignited the pure anger of a child who knew someone had violated those dearest to her. Unable to stay silent or let the images fester as private nightmares, The children chose to speak out, turning to the two women capable of shaking all of Port Charles when the truth is revealed, Carly and Tracy. Carly was the first to react. When her daughter whispered, with terror in her eyes, that she had witnessed Drew, the once trusted ally and a man Carly once leaned on after Sonny's departure, holding Nina in an intimate embrace amid the collapse of everything. Carly's world split apart. This was no longer just a personal wound. It was a betrayal of trust, a deception by someone she once considered family. She felt not only betrayed but also like she had failed to protect her daughter from witnessing something so vile that no words could properly describe it. Tracy. After hearing the story from Wiley, a child she had never considered central but had always quietly cared about, also fell into a moment of silence. But unlike Carly, Tracy didn't react emotionally. She reacted strategically. To her, this wasn't just a moral scandal, it was a weapon, a powerful card that could tip the entire balance of power currently forming in Port Charles. She saw not only the disgust in Nina and Drew's behavior but also the opportunity to clarify who truly deserved to hold influence in the family, the community, and the legal battles ahead. At the intersection of Carly and Tracy, two women who once couldn't stand each other, an unofficial alliance was forged. No words needed to be exchanged. No formal agreement was necessary. They understood each other through a look, an unspoken consensus: Nina and Drew must be stopped. Not out of personal revenge, but to protect the children. To restore the moral structure that was crumbling day by day. A new adjustment was forming, not driven by hatred, but by principle. Those who exploit or harm children with dirty acts no longer have the right to exist in any child's life in Port Charles. But from that point on, a new wave of problems reached its peak. Drew and Nina, already cast into the shadows of society, now faced an uncontrollable storm of backlash. They were no longer just isolated, they began to feel a silent, omnipresent form of punishment. Excluded from family meetings. Cut off from access to children. Branded as threats to the community. And perhaps the most brutal consequence of all was that they began to haunt each other. Every time Drew looked at Nina, he saw Wiley's disappointed eyes. Every time Nina thought of Drew, she remembered the tight press of Donna's lips as she recounted the event to Carly. They were no longer allies, but mirrors reflecting the disgust they had become. A new kind of torment began to take shape, not from society's judgmental gaze, but from within the minds of the wrongdoers themselves. Drew, once confident in his moral compass, now faltered every time he stepped into the hospital he once considered a safe haven. Nina, once a proud and fearless woman, now lowered her head whenever she passed Wiley's school, knowing she had not only hurt her grandson, but lost her last chance at redemption with her daughter. It was within that obsession that new shifts began to occur, not outward rebellion, but an inward collapse. Both knew, there was no way back. No excuse strong enough to erase the moment two innocent children saw everything. Port Charles was no longer a place where Drew and Nina could heal. It had become the place that engraved their mistake into memory, memories carried by Donna and Wiley, two children whose voices were finally heard. And once their memories were shared, retold, and believed, no one could deny the truth anymore. That truth was no longer just about a scandalous affair. It was a fracture in the trust between generations, a collapse that began in what should have been the safest place, the family. Willow is entering the most tumultuous phase of her life, where all the beliefs she held dear and every emotion she once cherished are now shattering piece by piece under the weight of betrayal from the one person she least expected, Drew. The man she once believed could be her emotional anchor after the wounds left by Michael. The man who quietly sat by her hospital bed through nights of life or death uncertainty. The man who revealed himself, in the end, as someone hiding behind a moral mask, committing acts she now sees as unforgivable. The truth about Drew's affair with Nina not only stunned Willow, it obliterated all the emotional defenses she had built after so many losses. She never imagined that while she was trying to forgive her biological mother, a woman who had once shattered her happiness through selfish choices, the man she trusted most was secretly sleeping with that very woman. It wasn't just romantic betrayal. It was a vicious blow to her dignity, her trust, and everything she had fought so hard to mend. Willow felt as though she had been cast as the last person in a cruel joke, and the discovery destroyed her in a way that words could never express. But Willow didn't scream. She didn't break things. She didn't lose control like someone fragile. Instead, she went quiet, a silence cold and sharp, more devastating than any rage. It was a silence that shattered Drew completely. In Willow's eyes, there was no longer pain, but a deep, irreparable disappointment. She no longer looked at him as a man she had once loved, but as a bitter mistake she had allowed into her life during a moment of emotional exhaustion. From that moment, a new series of adjustments began for Willow. She no longer wanted to share custody of her children with Drew. She no longer allowed him to participate in family decisions. And she certainly no longer permitted Nina, the woman she had once tried to forgive out of a sense of maternal duty, to play any role in Wiley or Amelia's lives. Willow began to redefine everything. She moved from passive to assertive, from seeking comfort to setting boundaries. To her, nothing mattered more now than the emotional and moral safety of her children, children who should never grow up in a world where betrayal, deceit, and cowardice were disguised as love. But as Willow made bold moves to reclaim her life, trouble followed. Drew, realizing his grip on control was slipping, became unstable. No longer the calm man he once was. He turned into someone desperate to avoid being cast out. His fall from grace drove him into madness, consulting lawyers to fight for custody. Secretly meeting with Nina to legitimize their relationship, even leaking false narratives to the media to salvage his plummeting image. But all those actions only solidified Willow's resolve. Drew no longer deserved a place in her family. Carly, Tracy, and Sunny all saw this shift in Willow and rallied behind her, not just as moral support, but as legal and social backing. Together, they became an unbreakable fortress shielding Willow and the children. Drew and Nina, once respected figures in the community, now stood at the center of a movement to re-establish the moral compass of Port Charles. And at the heart of this storm was Willow, the woman who had once remained quietly in the background, now stepping into the light as a symbol of strength and justice. Drew, in his desperation, began to realize that everything he did only made things worse. Every word he spoke was met with doubt. Every step he took was under scrutiny. And worst of all, Nina, the only person still by his side, was starting to see the truth. Their relationship was the root of it all. Between them, there was no love left, only obsession. Obsession with failure, with loss, and with everything they could never recover. The wave of resistance, led by Willow, was becoming more than just a backlash. It was turning into an internal revolution, not just for her, but for everyone around her. She didn't just reclaim control of her life. She set new standards, new boundaries, and drew clear lines for who was allowed in her and her children's world. There was no more room for empty promises. No more time for pretending. After everything, Willow was no longer a victim. She was the author of her own story. And Drew's greatest mistake was losing her, the one person who had still believed in the goodness within him, for a fleeting desire that now even he couldn't look at without feeling ashamed. The story is growing darker by the day, as rumors leaking from behind the scenes in Port Charles begin to spiral toward a terrifying possibility. Nina might be pregnant with Drew's child. This isn't just another shock, it's the beginning of an unprecedented disaster, a nightmare no one ever thought could happen, especially given that both Nina and Drew are already seen as traitors, cast out by both family and community. If the rumor is confirmed, everything simmering beneath the surface will erupt into a violent storm, threatening to destroy whatever fragile ties they still have with those around them. Nina, after all her moral and familial failures, now faces a brutal reality. A life may be forming within her, the result of her reckless, sinful relationship with Drew. She is no longer a woman trying to salvage her reputation. She has become a symbol of an endless chain of mistakes with no way out. And what's more frightening is that despite knowing the consequences, she begins to feel a strange attraction to this new biological bond, because it's the only thing left tethering Drew to her. While everyone else turns their backs. While the glares of contempt and judgment bear down on her, Drew remains her only anchor. That emotional vulnerability, that dependency on a twisted relationship, begins to breed a new kind of emotion in her, a love born not of reason, but of the fear of abandonment. For Drew, the news of Nina's pregnancy isn't a joy, but a devastating blow, a direct hit to the guilt he's been trying to outrun. He knows he's made a terrible mistake, knows their relationship was forged out of collapse, weakness, and lies. But now, the consequences are no longer whispers or social rejection, they've become a life. A life tied to the very woman he helped drag to the bottom of public disgrace. And what makes it worse is that instead of feeling connected, Drew feels trapped. Every time he thinks of the child, he doesn't feel the joy of impending fatherhood, he sees Willow. The woman he lost. The woman who may never forgive him, especially now that his next child may be the result of such cruel betrayal. If Nina truly is pregnant, it would ignite a fresh wave of outrage and rejection across Port Charles. Willow would not remain calm. Because her own biological mother, the woman she had been trying to forgive, will have once again crossed every moral line by sleeping with and carrying the child of the man Willow once loved and trusted. Carly would be furious beyond measure, as Drew, once an essential part of her and her children's lives, has now given Nina, her lifelong nemesis, yet another foothold into the lives of those Carly has fought to protect. And Sonny, even if he has tried to stay silent, could no longer deny that Nina's actions can't be justified by emotions or maternal instincts anymore. They are part of a deliberate, escalating series of choices with disastrous consequences. The existence of this child, if confirmed, would become one of the most horrifying symbols in Port Charles, a living embodiment of madness, a direct result of betrayal beyond limits. It would not only deepen every existing fracture, but create a permanent, irreparable divide among families, especially between Wiley, Donna, Amelia, and the next generation of children destined to grow up in this storm of dysfunction. The attraction Nina feels toward Drew is no longer love, it's desperation. A desperate clinging to the fear of being abandoned. And that alone proves a new catastrophe is quietly forming. One that is not only personal but collective, where a child, not even born yet, is already doomed to grow up under the weight of contempt and hatred from both sides of the family. No one is truly ready to welcome this life, and that fact stands as a chilling warning to Nina. She has gone too far, beyond the point of return. If this is true, then Nina will no longer simply be the woman who once lost a child, who once failed to earn a place in motherhood with grace. She will become the mother of a child conceived in devastation. And with every step she takes from now on, she will never escape that truth. Because this disaster cannot be buried, cannot be denied, and cannot be undone with any apology.